Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Superversive livestream on whatever day you listen to this, since we don't know when it will be uploaded. Ben cannot be here. He has prior engagements, so I am in charge tonight. That's Anthony Marchetta. I am here with my guest, David Hallquist. How are you doing, David?
Doing pretty good. Like you, I am disconnected in time and floating wildly through the time stream with no idea where we will eventually end up in the chronology of the universe.
Oh, that's good. It's always nice when I can find someone who I don't need to explain all of that to, because it gets kind of tedious after a while. People scream. There's always a lot of panic at first, and I need to tell them that I don't mean them any harm, and as long as they don't touch the glowing orb, they'll probably be fine.
Probably.
So, anyway, what we were going to discuss today was that I had seen Deadpool and Wolverine. David, have you actually seen it yet?
I have not. I'd like to hear more.
Okay. And then we're just going to discuss action movies, Hollywood in general, all of that fun stuff. You know, for whatever that's worth. Whatever you find, if you find
as a former fan turned fascinated observer to the Hollywood phenomenon, I'd be interested to talk about it.
Yeah, so let's start with this. The first thing that I will say is that Hollywood is an absolute disaster right now. I do not recommend most people go see movies. I don't even really recommend you go see this movie, even though I did not hate it. Alright, so Deadpool and Wolverine. What is my review? So, this is actually kind of tricky. I guess I'll start with this. Did I like the movie? Like, do I regret going? Did I enjoy what I saw? Yeah. I did. I laughed.
You enjoyed it, or you regret went to go see it?
I enjoyed it. I had an enjoyable time. It was a fun movie. Yeah, Ryan Reynolds is really at home in the part. Hugh Jackman definitely did not phone in his performance as some version of Wolverine, which we'll get into. It made fun of a few things, you know. What's weird is that if you were expecting it to really rip into Marvel, you're not going to get that. So, but I will say it did not seem like it avoided the impression of pulling its punches, at least to me. Which is what I was kind of worried about. You don't want Deadpool to ever feel like it's pulling its punches, right? Like, that kind of ruins the fun of Deadpool as a character and Deadpool as a franchise, right? However, I think it avoids that by just kind of focusing on something else. This movie was more like, as you'll see many people talk about, like an homage or love letter, and a very mocking one, to the era of superheroes that was like pre-mega MCU, right? Like, before the MCU absolutely dominated everything. So, you see, and by the way, I don't think this is a movie that can really be spoiled. If you didn't realize there were going to be a ton of cameos in it, then you weren't paying any attention to any part of it. The plot literally does not matter. So, I'm going to spoil everything. Like, if that bothers you, let me know.
You've warned everyone.
Yeah. Okay. So, Wesley Snipes is in the movie as Blade, which was probably the coolest cameo, even though if I ever have seen Blade, I think I did at some point. I do not remember it. But just the idea of, like, wow, Wesley Snipes as Blade is in this movie. That's kind of cool.
It's going to be worth 2 hours of your time to watch it over again then. Very solid.
Yeah.
Very enjoyable movie.
So I've heard. And it even had an okay sequel, is what I've heard, too.
The sequel was roundly adequate.
Let's see. Elektra, what's her name? Angelina Jolie? Is that it? Do I have the name right? Yeah. There was a terrible Elektra movie, if you don't remember. But Elektra was in the movie.
Avoided seeing it.
One of the best jokes in the film was that Chris Evans was in the film. Actually had a very long, like, probably a solid 20-minute stint in the movie, right? But he did not play Captain America. You could probably guess. He played the Human Torch. And then he gets murdered. So, you know, quite brutally, too. I'll also say this. It really didn't pull its punches on the violence. I thought the action scenes were very well choreographed. Now, why do I say, like, I thought the movie was okay? Because it sounds like I'm going, like, yeah, I liked a lot of different things about it, which is
Mhm.
true. Why do I think it's only okay? All right, so there are a few reasons. For one thing, it's kind of hard to talk about the movie because, and even like, was it funny? It's like, well, I guess mostly. I chuckled throughout the entire thing. I never like thought it was. I never thought it was like unfunny, if that makes sense. But it's also really hard to remember any jokes that I actually liked. In fact, it's
Mhm.
hard to remember anything in this movie. Uh, like there is so little in the movie that is even remotely memorable or worth talking about. Like it is
Maybe people don't actually see it. They just get tranquilized and are subjected to a post-hypnotic fugue.
yeah, it gets that vibe. Like there are a couple things that I like mildly chuckled at. Like I like the joke where Ryan Reynolds shows up and there's of course it's a multiverse movie, so there's like all Deadpools from all different universes.
Mhm.
I like the joke of Ryan Reynolds as Nice Pool, and at one point, Deadpool decides to use him as a human shield, and Wolverine's yelling at him. And then he goes, "All right, how long does it take you to regenerate?" And then he looks at him and goes, "Regenerate? You regenerate?" Uh, that was pretty funny. And
Mhm.
then his head explodes. Let's see what else. Like I said, the fight scenes are very good. I'll give it that. I especially liked, honestly, the best fight scene was the first one. So, this movie, like, it makes a big deal out of the fact that Wolverine was killed off in Logan, and everybody loved that, right? Uh, everybody loved that movie. Everybody loved
Another
that
good
ending
movie.
for
Yeah,
Wolverine. What was that?
another good movie. Worth seeing if you haven't.
Yeah,
And
I saw
yeah, it
Logan.
is the right ending for Wolverine.
I didn't really like a lot of the anti-America stuff in it, but it was an overall good movie,
Of
and Hugh
course.
Jackman acted his heart out in it.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, so there's a lot of reverence for that movie in here because like that's the whole thing. It's like you're really gonna bring him back after you gave Wolverine such a perfect ending, right? Uh, which is fair. So they
Hmm.
literally started off by addressing this, as you can imagine, the way that Deadpool will. He is literally digging up the corpse of Logan because he's
Of
going,
course.
they all claim that he's dead, but I know he regenerates. And then, of course, he finds the bones, and he's like, damn it, he's
Right.
actually dead. And then he
Right.
uses his corpse in a fight scene. Uh, which, by the way, this is pretty amusing to think of because it also makes it actual canon that this is what happens after the events of Logan. Uh,
Hmm.
he actually uses Wolverine's corpse in a fight scene. Uh,
I mean, that sounds about right.
Yep. But anyway, this is the best fight scene in the movie, in my opinion. It was the most entertaining. It was also the opening scene. And it made me go, wow, that was actually pretty fun. It was creative. It was funny, right? Like, it kind of gets you, like, in the spirit of things. You know, there are people like Mahler. If you follow, do you follow a bunch of the critics that I do?
Probably a different set of critics.
Do you know Mahler by any chance?
Have not heard of.
Okay. So Mahler has a reputation. He's known as the long man because he makes extremely long reviews. When I say extremely long, I mean next level. We're talking like 10 hours, right? Uh,
Wow. 10-hour review for a 2-hour movie.
mhm.
Okay.
I
Serious
actually like
commitment.
Mahler a lot, though, because first off, not all of his reviews are that long, right?
Hmm.
But even besides that, like, I do enjoy him on occasion. Now, I've once told somebody this, and they looked at me horrified that I would watch down a review, and I'm like, well, I don't do it all at once. Like, it's not like I sit down and just stare and don't move for 10 hours, play it in the background while I drive or something. Uh,
Hmm.
right? Like, but yeah, I enjoy Mahler. He's very in depth. He's a big believer, too, which is one of the reasons I like him, in objective quality actually existing, meaning that
Hmm.
just because you like a movie doesn't mean it's good, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So
There's some absolute schlock I love, but I recognize it's garbage.
yeah, it's And that's been very, like, honestly, I found that to be very helpful in kind of checking my own biases as well. It's like, it helps me to stop and go, you're allowed, and Muller's made this point, it's like, you are allowed to like something that is not good, right?
Mhm.
Like, just because you like it doesn't mean it's good. And it's allowed me to be like, am I making excuses for this thing or not? It's a good check, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Mahler's point, he
Really,
goes, here's my disclaimer. He goes, I think most people who see this movie will like it. He goes, I don't think it was good. Uh,
okay.
and I think Mahler, like, his points are solid. So, right, his thing was that he didn't like this version of Wolverine. So, to get around the fact that Logan is in fact dead from the end of Logan, right?
Alternate universe Logan.
Yeah, they go into another universe, and this is supposedly the worst, quote unquote, version of Wolverine. And you learn it's because, like, he got drunk and they killed all the X-Men while he was gone, and he got back too late, and now everybody hates him, right?
Mm.
Which is whatever. Like, it's okay, fine. But Mahler goes, I think that they promised us seeing Wolverine again. They gave us a different character. And I think there's a point to that, right? Like, it's not the character from Logan. It's not the character from the X-Men movies. It's Hugh
Right.
Jackman playing a different character who is similar
This is,
to Wolverine.
this is a similar thing that happened actually in the books themselves at one point. You had this development arc of Wolverine into from a wild, irresponsible man to actually very mature and thoughtful character. Like, still a man of incredible violence. But, like, he knew what he was doing, and he'd think about it, and he had, regrets, more of the grizzled warrior with wisdom kind of character. Because, he'd been around since, I think, the early 60s. And then a new writer came in and was like, yeah, no, we like wild man crazy Wolverine better. We're just going to do that. It's like, no. You just destroyed an entire decades long character arc for nothing.
Yeah, this is one of the problems with multiverses that Mahler has kind of raged about, right? Like, that they kind of, by being able to substitute with other characters that are similar to but different, they kind of try and have their cake and eat it too, which is exactly what they do here.
Well, sure.
And I agree, like, that is what they do. It's quite clearly what they do.
The plot problem with the multiverse in a story is similar to the ethical and teleological problems of multiverse theory in it that people are actually looking into, which is it obviates the reality of choices, right? If
It
you
does
make
and
a
it
choice
doesn't,
here,
though, right? Like,
right.
the problem, I think, is that the way that storytellers are using the multiverse in the modern day, which is something that the Critical Drinker has talked about as well, right? Is that they are using it in a way to try and, like, get the emotional resonance of, here's this character we have brought back that you love, while also not being able to do whatever they want to them. Like, the most stunning, like, obvious example of this was in the movie Multiverse of Madness, one of the all-time great So Bad It's Good movies, because it's probably the worst superhero movie ever made, objectively. Right? Writing-wise, at least. They have a scene...
that one. I was kind of horrified away from it and everything I'd heard on it.
I was extremely entertained watching it, but it was awful. I do not recommend it at all.
How was Thanos?
What was that?
Not Thanos. How was Kang?
Kang? No,
Yeah.
you're thinking of Quantum Mania.
Oh, okay.
Different
you're right.
movie. Multiverse of Madness was the strange movie, and it wasn't It was the Scarlet Witch as the villain in it, but whatever. It doesn't matter. There is a scene in that movie that's actually a perfect example of what we're talking about. They go to another universe and the Illuminati come to them. And the Illuminati is just like this universe's Avengers, and right? But it's Mr. Reed, Mr. Fantastic, who's played by John Krasinski, which is like dream casting, right? For at least for a lot of people, apparently. Black Bolt, who's like a classic DC character, female Captain America, except it's Captain Britain and it's Peggy Carter. I don't know how they make sense of any of that, but this is what they did. And a Miss Marvel who is played by Captain Marvel's black friend in the Captain Marvel movie.
To be fair, they've had 3 Captain Marvels in Marvel. So
no, I know.
There is actually a black Captain Marvel at one point.
You get it. I get that. But what I'm saying is this is the alternate universe. All these, so they get to say we brought in Mr. Fantastic. Oh, and Professor X he's using his classic X-Men cartoon wheelchair, and played by Patrick Stewart. Well, naturally, they're all horribly killed off. This is a perfect example of what we're talking about, right? These characters were literally introduced with zero effort put into getting us to connect with them, like them, or care about them, knowing that we would because we know these characters from comics and other media, right? And then it kills them off dramatically, but they could do that because they could just bring them back anyway in another universe, so it has literally no stakes. It's a way of trying to have your cake and eat it too. I do think that that Deadpool 3 does this with Wolverine. That's what they were trying to do, and I think they're pretty explicit about that's what they're trying to do. I think it's more acceptable because I don't think anybody is approaching Deadpool and Wolverine for the strong character work or the great, right? It's a comedy, first and foremost. With that said, I understand Mahler's point. He's like, the way they advertise it is we're going to see Wolverine again, and that's not actually what they gave us, right? And he's right. I think that that's, like, fundamentally correct, but it's not a huge... I don't think it's a game-breaking thing just because, like, you want to see Hugh Jackman playing a version of this character again, and he did do that, right? And Hugh Jackman is giving it his all in the movie. He's playing everything very seriously, even as Deadpool is not, right? Their fight scenes are as brutal and graphic as you could hope they would be, which is the whole point. Like, these are 2 regenerating characters, so you could do literally anything to them.
Right.
So they're very graphic fight scenes. Yeah. But I agree with Mahler's point on that. He says he thought that Wade and Logan's characters were assassinated. Logan, I suppose you could argue, wasn't really assassination because it wasn't Logan, but that's and that's kind of the point, right? Like, that they could just do whatever they want with him. Deadpool, though, was Deadpool's character assassinated? Do I agree with Mahler on this point? I guess I would argue no, because frankly, Deadpool was never a particularly good person. Like, which is again, that's the joke, though. Like, he is and he isn't. That's the point.
He's kind of like Captain Jack Sparrow or something like that. Like, he's not a lovable rogue with a heart of gold. He's an actual rogue.
I'm going to disagree with that assessment of Jack. Like, pay attention to... First off, the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie is unironically one of my favorite movies.
That's fantastic.
It has one of the best scripts of the 20th century, I would argue. Or sorry, 21st century, not 20th. Not of the 20th, that's too long. But of the 20, it has one of the tightest scripts of the 21st century. It's extremely well constructed. The point about, and I don't even like the sequels, by the way. I don't like 2. I don't like 3. 4 is meh. 5 is not good, right? I really only like the first one, but I love the first movie. So
it's really well done.
Yeah. Jack in that movie, I want you to actually pay attention to the choices that Jack makes in the movie. Jack wants everybody to think that he is a bad person who does not care. But in reality, every choice he makes is probably is a choice that saves the most lives, is how I would put it. Right? Everything he does. For example, there's the scene where Will is about to get executed, and Jack kind of inserts himself in the middle of it, right? Now, when Jack does this, he claims, and plausibly too, because the script is so cleverly written and Johnny Depp's performance is so good, that he doesn't really care about Will. He's doing this for like what Will can give him or whatever. But you notice it just so happens to save Will's life, right? And this happens over and over again with Jack's actions in the movie. Jack wants people to think that he doesn't care, but in reality, he does, right? But whatever. This is a tangent, and I'm only mentioning it because I love that movie. It's so good, Pirates of the Caribbean. It's one of those movies that's like, it's so good. It's almost, I watch it and I go, how on earth did they make this? Like, how did it come out of a theme park ride?
There are a few movies that are worth slowly picking apart and going, this is an example of how to do something right. How did they do it? Right. It is that good.
Yeah. It's like, this was based on a theme park ride. How did they get a movie this good out of it? And the answer is that it's the script. The script is incredibly tightly written. People will say that it's Jack, but I think that that's too much of an oversimplification. Jack is one element of the movie.
Yes.
He is a very important element, and he's great, but everybody in that movie is great. Anyway, back to what I was saying, though, with Deadpool and Wolverine. Like, Deadpool in earlier movies, like, there's a joke, for example, where Deadpool gets the Human Torch killed by basically they are dragged in front of the main villain, who's, like, I don't know. You know comics, so you might know this character. You know him a little more than me, anyway. Professor X's sister, Nova, and she is the villain of the movie, right? So they're dragged in front of her, and then Deadpool starts talking about how the Human Torch spent the whole ride over insulting her, so she, like, literally melts off his skin. It's very graphic. And then and that's probably the funniest joke in the whole thing, is that, like, Wolverine is like, you stupid idiot, you got him killed. And he goes, hey, we are all grieving right now. And then later in the movie, they're like, oh, hey, how is Johnny doing? You know, he was one of our best friends. Deadpool's like, look, it's not worth talking about, okay? And this is a recurring gag in the film that he got Johnny killed. So, whatever, that's great and all, right? But I guess what I'm saying is this callous disregard for life is kind of in tune with what Deadpool's done. I'm trying to think of what Mahler was referring to. He does break up with Vanessa and then get back together with her at the end. But the reason that he breaks up with her is because he is worried that he is not becoming, like, the sort of man who Vanessa could be proud of or something. So, now, I don't really think that Deadpool's out of character. I would say the biggest problem with the movie is, A, the plot is a complete mess, right? Now, you could argue that you're not going into this movie for the plot, and you are correct. You're not. That's a fair argument, right? You're not going into the Deadpool movie for the plot. At the same time, though, Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2, especially Deadpool 1, are actually pretty tightly plotted films. Like, as weird as that sounds. Especially Deadpool 1. Deadpool 1 is very, like, there is a clear A to Z.
Solid movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very clear exactly what's going on and how everything hangs together, right? That's just kind of gone here, and they just sort of, and you're just supposed to, like, not think about it, right? So the whole thing, like, I don't even know how to describe it. They get thrown. The villain is an idiot. Like, instead of killing them or imprisoning them, right, or doing something to stop them.
Right.
He sends them to a dimension where they can escape, right? Obviously,
Wow.
James Bond-esque. Really
Right.
dumb.
Do they at least comment on that?
Not they actually don't, which is weird. You would think that Deadpool would. And like
Yeah.
I said, the other problem is that the jokes in the other Deadpool movies are a lot sharper.
Hmm.
This movie,
Yeah.
it's just like I still remember laughing at some of the scenes, like in Deadpool 2, his long death scene at the end of the movie is hilarious. When he starts singing, "Do you want to build a snowman?" and then everybody's just kind of waiting for him to die.
Hmm.
Like, that's one of the best jokes in either of the Deadpool movies. The original Deadpool, I remember, like, all of the stuff with how his face looked, and he was going on and on about that. The X-Force, when they all died in dramatic ways, was really funny. So, lots of good
Yes.
jokes in those movies. But in this movie, it's like, I can't really remember. I can remember so little of the humor in it, right? It all just kind of floats off you. You're, like, mildly chuckling the entire time. Yeah, that's why it's kind of hard to talk about. And this is the thing, though, like, that we're sort of... The plot is a mess, right? It relies on the villain being a complete moron. But you're not in it for the plot. You're in it for the many, many cameos. Wesley Snipes, Angelina Jolie, Channing Tatum is in it. The little girl from the Logan movie is in it in a bigger role, right? Like, lots of different Chris Evans, lots of different things. And they're all fun, and I think that it's more excusable for them to be in a Deadpool movie, because I don't expect a Deadpool movie to really be anything much more than that.
Hmm.
I guess the disappointment is that I know the movie could have been better, since they made Deadpool 1 and 2, and those were
Hmm.
better, right? But at the same time, like, it gave me most of what I was looking for, so that's why I would
You
say
think
that
it's run
overall...
out of steam as a franchise?
I wouldn't say that. I would say it's not so much that it ran out of steam as a franchise as they just didn't do as good of a job, right? Like, this is kind of the argument with superhero movies in general. Did superhero movies, like, were we oversaturated, or did they just stop writing good ones? My argument has always been, and will always be, the latter, because the Western movies, yes, they did eventually die out but they died out after a decades-long run of dominance, right? And they were just as tropey, but they were making good ones for, in every decade, right? Like, you were finding good Western movies. Superhero movies, I think, could have gone on longer than they did, but they just kind of decided not to. They lost the ability or something. I don't know exactly what happened, and that's, I guess, a good segue, because that's the other thing I wanted to say, is that Deadpool and Wolverine, in my opinion, is pretty much the peak of what you can do, right? Of what Hollywood can do, right? Not terrible, okay, made me chuckle. I got what I wanted from the theater, 5.5 out of 10, right? Like,
Okay.
that's, and I think that's kind of the peak of what modern Hollywood is capable of nowadays, right? Like, every now and then you'll get a nostalgia sequel that's being put out by people who really love the original and is way better than it should be, right? Top Gun Maverick, of course, being the example of
Yeah.
this, as well as, like, Twisters, I heard, was pretty okay.
It seems to me they're still pretty capable when they throw the darn checklist away. When they just try and write a plot and write characters and produce the film, and they get kind of the freedom and the check mark to do it. And this one's like, okay, we're not pushing anything. We're just trying to make a movie that makes money. They seem to still be able to do it, and the pressure seems to be coming off of the checklist somewhat.
I guess my problem, though, is, like, as I think it over, when's the last truly great movie that's come out of Hollywood? Now, there has been a truly great movie that came out relatively recently, and that's Godzilla Minus One.
Right.
Which
But not
Godzilla Minus
Hollywood.
One made it onto my number 8
It was
on my
amazing.
10 favorite movies of all time. It is
I'm
one
glad
of
I
my
saw it.
favorite movies.
Yes.
Incredible film. Not Hollywood, right? The Boy and the Heron, excellent movie. Really enjoyed it. Not
Still need to see
Hollywood.
it.
What was that?
Still need to see it.
Oh, you gotta
I
watch it.
thought
It's great.
the sequel for Dune was pretty solid.
Yeah, I guess Dune 2 was solid, but like the last great movie I could think of, to be honest with, like really great, like inarguably excellent, was The Social Network, which is from like what, 2010?
Mm-hmm.
That is 14 years ago. You know, uh, I love The Social Network, by the way. Have you seen that movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the Zuckerberg story, right?
Yeah. Great movie. Really, really good.
It was interesting. It didn't absorb me quite as much, but the character study of young Zuckerberg as he's putting things together was interesting, right?
Yeah, the interesting part of the movie, too, is that it's not particularly accurate, actually, despite the fact that it portrays itself as being such. Mostly, as I read a really interesting article, actually, and they said the thing about Zuckerberg in the movie is that he's portrayed as being incredibly angry, right? Like, just at the world, you know. He's a very bitter little gamma bitch boy, right? And he idolizes the cool alpha Justin Timberlake, you know, in the film, right? And this causes him to betray his friend and whatever. But they said the thing about the real Mark Zuckerberg is that they said he's like the least angry person who ever lived. And this tracks to me
I
because,
believe it.
yeah, the reason that this tracks to me is because he's clearly autistic, right? Like he's an emotion. He is, and I don't mean this about all autistics, but I mean this about Zuckerberg. The man is clearly like he is an emotionless robot who struggles to understand how human beings normally react to things. So I have no doubt that he is not at all an angry person. They also said, like, in the movie, he's portrayed as pining over this girl and having difficulties with women. They said, in reality, the real Mark Zuckerberg was dating his wife and, you know, the woman who would become his wife, and they're still married, right? Like, that was really just not a thing in his life at all, you know. Eduardo Saverin was also not as big of a deal in the creation of Facebook as they make it out here. There was another player who was barely in the movie, Dustin Moskovitz, I think, something like that. And he's barely in the movie, and he played a much bigger role than the movie portrays. They also mentioned that the Justin Timberlake character, who's also based on a real guy, was... it's funny. I read him commenting on the movie. He said, "All right, so it's hard for me to be offended because they had me portrayed by international playboy Justin Timberlake. He's like, it's hard for me to be too offended, but they also made him an incredibly immoral asshole. He's like, so you know, yeah, the real guy." He is a really fascinating person in his own right. Like, his thing is that he's just really, really good at spotting the next big thing. Like, eerily good at it. So, people will literally pay him millions of dollars to be on their, like, development panel for a project and tell them if what they have is a hit or not and what they can do to change it into a hit. Like, that's his special skill. You know, is that he can spot trends. So he's an interesting guy in his own right, but very different from the character in the movie. You know, but it's a great movie. Like, it's just odd to me that this is the last movie I could think of as being, like, genuinely superb, right? And it's 14 years old. Now, that's not to say there haven't been movies since then that I liked. You know, I liked a few. I liked Spider-Man No Way Home a lot. Really fun movie. Really enjoyed it. You know, I liked Yeah, I mean, as far as the Marvel machine goes, right? I liked Endgame well
Hmm?
enough. People have been turning on it in recent years. I will not. I still think it's pretty good.
Hmm. Which one?
Endgame.
Endgame. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
What's wrong with
solid,
Endgame? Yeah.
solid finale. Yeah. No Way Home. Good movie. Uh, Maverick. I haven't seen, but I believe everybody who tells me it's good. I just didn't have the opportunity at the time. Yeah. But I'm willing to concede that Top Gun Maverick is a very good movie.
Oh, yes. You should actually. It's again another case of definitely something to catch up on.
Yeah, I would see it that right. Like it was, I wasn't
Mhm.
avoiding it. It just ended up not getting around to it. You know. So yeah, like it's just weird to me though. I don't
Mhm.
know. There's so few. There's so few truly superb movies, right? Like, and you go, well, that's a high bar. Like, yeah, it is, but I'm not asking for like a ton. I mean, in like 14 years, I can't really think of any. You know, like there have been good movies, some even very good movies, but movies on the level of, The Social Network or Godzilla Minus One or The Boy and the Heron, right? I mean, anime is still making good stuff, and as much as people bemoan the state of anime, like they do this every other year, uh, from
Well,
my perspective, they're still producing good things.
going back in time 10 years, we had Interstellar
Yeah,
in
there you go.
2014, which was quite frankly amazing.
Incredible movie,
Um,
but a decade ago.
and let me
I
do
mean,
my own
even
journey
Nolan.
through time.
Nolan produced Interstellar. Nolan
Yep.
also created Oppenheimer. Now, I watched Oppenheimer.
Uh huh.
We had a discussion about it on stream. I liked Oppenheimer.
Hmm.
It is not as good as Interstellar. Not even close, honestly.
Hmm.
Very flawed
Correct.
movie. Like,
Yes.
again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's a
20
good
minutes
movie.
could have come out of the movie with no loss at all, which is a bad sign.
And the
And
sex scene should not have been in there. It was really
that it
weird.
was, yeah, absolutely irrelevant to the story and distracting to it. It's like, okay,
It was also
this
just
is,
extremely strange the way it was
yeah,
done. Like,
and it's not relevant to that kind of story. It's like people have forgotten how to do film without shocking you.
mm-hmm.
Alfred Hitchcock would have had no difficulty dealing with the marriage and the marriage issues without showing anything, and it would hit harder because you wouldn't be distracted by the weirdness. The Martian came out in 2015. That was a solid movie. I realize I'm hitting all the stuff that's not the top, like the top movies,
What movie did you say?
but The Martian.
Yeah,
I
I
thought they
was a
did a
big
pretty
fan of
good
The Martian when
adaptation.
it came out. I think that the
Hmm.
book is better,
The book's absolutely better.
and I understand that that's like a cliche, but in this case, I can name specific reasons as to why. Like, there were changes that they made that they shouldn't have changed. Specifically, the final scene, uh,
Ah,
the
you come
rescue scene.
around. First Deadpool 2016. We also have coming out one of the, as far as I can tell, the only sequel Star Wars movies that was worth watching was Rogue One,
Rogue
which
One was okay at best.
I
It was
really liked Rogue One.
it was meh. Um,
It's I'm actually more fond of it than many of the previous movies in Star Wars. Actually,
so
not all,
I
but
am of the
it hit all the
opinion.
right buttons for me.
Yeah, I'm of
Hmm.
the opinion and always have been that the critical renaissance of the prequels is entirely undeserved and they are terrible movies. Uh,
Yes, with
like
the, I'll give you Star Wars Episode 3 is actually pretty good with some really unbelievably bad chunks stuck into it.
I could see
but
why
the
you would
heart of
say
a
that.
decent movie is there.
Let me put this another way. I think that the heart of a good trilogy is in the prequels, which many people have pointed out. I've watched the Red Letter Media reviews. I consider them to be the famous ones, right? I
Yes.
consider them to be just about lethal, right? Like, I don't really see a way to entirely defend them. With that said, I
They would have
don't.
had to have been completely reworked on the cutting room floor to be made into the kind of quality movies they were supposed to be.
Yeah, I will say though that I don't agree with everything that those reviews said, right? Like I don't
Mhm.
totally defer to them. For example, I disagree with Red Letter Media. I do think that the final fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan, outside of the final moment, which was dumb as hell,
Mhm.
was otherwise a fantastic fight scene.
Yeah.
Emotional, invested, really well choreographed. Now the it's too late. I have the high ground scene. I have seen fans desperately try and salvage, uh, like, oh, well, Obi-Wan was bluffing. It's like, no, just stop. This was retarded, and you know it. Uh,
Yes.
right? They had no. Well, in reality, what was going on there was that they didn't know how to end the fight. Right? Like they
Correct.
couldn't think of a way to end it.
How
With
does he
that
do it?
said,
Anakin's supposed to be the stronger lightsaber fighter now. How does he pull it off?
yeah.
Oh, I know. High ground always wins.
Yeah, sure. Even though they can basically fly.
Hmm.
With that said, I will say that it was a good fight scene overall. So I'll give it that. Also, and I will say this about the prequels, always have thought this, still think this to this day. Conceptually, the idea of the prequels was solid. This is another thing I disagree with Red Letter Media about, because they've gone on the record even discussing this, going, should these movies have been made? Like, was this a story worth telling? And they said, like, no, not really. Nobody wanted to see this. And I'm like, I actually kind of
No,
disagree.
it was
Like,
kind of cool.
I
It
think
just
that
it had real
conceptually,
problems with it.
yeah, I think conceptually there's really nothing wrong with the idea of the prequels, right? Uh, I even don't like the broad strokes of the plot even kind of work, right? Like,
It's real dangerous for anyone to get to be so rich and so famous and so with so much cred that they can't accept an editor. They
uh-huh.
can't listen to anyone when they're told this is a bad idea or this needs to be worked or this needs fixing. And Lucas got there, and the prequels show it. It's now, I think by the time we got to episode 3, he was realizing that he was making his life's work into an absolute disaster. But it's very clear. The first of the prequels, episode 1, he didn't have any, like the editors were just either didn't touch it or were afraid to touch it, and yeah.
Yeah, the critical renaissance of the prequels has come from nostalgia, in my opinion. I don't think there is an objective way to defend them. Like I said, I consider while I don't agree with everything they say, I consider them taken as a whole. The Red Letter Media movies are basically lethal, right? Like, there isn't really a way around them. They absolutely eviscerate them, and that's, once again, this kind of goes back to what you were saying. If you grew up with them, saw, right, the good elements, and have good memories of the prequels and like them, you are allowed to like any movie you want to like, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But that doesn't mean that they're good. I don't think
Right.
they're good. This was something that was meant, like, Star Wars died with the prequels. It didn't die with the sequels.
Yes.
The sequels,
It
when they were trotted out, were always a bad idea. They never should have been made in the first place.
they
But
could have they could have definitely done things like Rogue One or series like The Mandalorians. There's a lot to take out of the Star Wars universe and explore that was still there. The mistake was we're now going to rewrite everything that came after and quick get out the checklist. And let's also change director and writer and producer every single time we make a new movie. I can't imagine why it didn't work.
yeah, it's there's a big problem with. All right, let me pivot to another way. Ben and I have
Sure.
discussed this on the show before. The thing
Uh huh.
about writing these sorts of things and these sorts of movies, and want to be very clear about the way I'm wording it and the way I'm saying it, is it isn't that hard to make something that is fine, right?
Hmm.
Like a solid 7 out of 10. The fact that these movies were abysmal speaks to some sort of really greater problem in Hollywood. The Mandalorian season 1 is actually a perfect example of this. Because I would consider season 1, I didn't really like it that much, uh, but it had its moments. Like, I actually think that that's a good example of a solid, like, 6 to 7 out of 10 show, right? Probably 7 if you're being generous. Uh, you know, it's not great, but it's fine. You know, people enjoyed it. It gave you what you wanted. Like, no joke. And when I say this again, I'm being like very serious. I could have written a better sequel trilogy than what was written. I'm not
Of
saying I would
course.
have written one that was on the level of the original. I'm not saying it would have been
Hmm.
great. I'm not even
Right.
saying it would have been that good. I am saying it would have been fine, right?
Right.
I could have written it in a way that people would have watched it, come out of the theater, and said, "Yeah, I enjoyed that."
Right. Well, you wouldn't take a property that was decades old and worth billions of dollars and said, how can I turn this thing upside down as much as possible and, really wreck everyone's expectations and do something with it that it's never been done. You wouldn't go in with artistic malice as the objective with a property, especially one that wasn't your own. You'd be like, okay, I'm either going to find a way to honor this or I'm not going to do it. It's really that simple.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, part of like somebody mentioned, like, it is honestly incredible that Disney managed to do this to Star Wars. This was a property that was printing money, like, easily. All you had to do was just, like, not completely tank it into the ground, right?
And they did.
And that's exactly what they did. They did the same thing with Marvel. I remember, like, a
Mhm.
discussion that Mahler had, and Mahler and Critical Drinker and them, where they asked him, like, what would it take after Endgame to destroy Marvel? And his answer was a series of bomb after bomb after bomb, like concerted disasters, one after another, all in a row for years. And he's like, I can't believe that we're actually in the world where this is exactly what happened. Uh,
Right.
like, there's also this really weird thing going on in Hollywood where it's like, I want you to actually think about this for a moment, because it's not actually that easy of a question to answer, at least not if you
Hmm.
don't know what's going on, which is this. How is Disney in business? Like, really think about it for a moment. They have been bleeding money, and not just money, hundreds of millions of dollars per movie for years, right?
So they came in, yeah, they came in not only with a fat background, but they also had tons of IP of their own. And Disney itself was solid gold. You could attach Disney's name to anything, and instantly you could add a zero or more to its value. So
Yep.
anything they could buy, anything they would acquire, anything they would partner with would intrinsically become more valuable. And they instantly would have a profit on their balance sheet. They would instantly be able to pay off loans. They could borrow for basically nothing because they're Disney. Of course, they can pay it back. They could get anyone to partner with them at any time on any project at very unfavorable terms, just to be able to work with Disney. They took that level of reputation, and now people snicker. So it took a long time, but they had an immense amount of, like, reputational capital that was worth billions of dollars, if assuming you could put a price tag on something that's priceless. Like, they took that reputation and they flushed it. So that's part of how they're managed to still exist, is they can produce stinker after stinker, and people will go, well, it's Disney, they're just having a hard period. They've had hard periods before. Remember the Black Cauldron? You know, they can do that for a while. They can't do it forever. I haven't looked at their balance sheet, but it probably doesn't look very pretty anymore.
Yeah, like, it raises the question, though, of, like, we understand that they've tanked all of their IPs into the ground and bleed money with every movie. How are they still open? Like, what sort of business is able to just, like, run as if nothing happened, right? Perlmutter just dropped his investment in the company, and Disney has not addressed it. Like, nothing is changing, as far as I can tell. Right, like after Ike Perlmutter dropped drew out of the company. Like, the answer here is that they're in the thrall of banks, right?
Of course, they have to be leveraged to the nines to pull this kind of stuff off.
Yeah,
even making
that's
payroll
exactly
some
it.
Other stuff they're going to be in with us somewhat.
In fact, this actually explains pretty much everything about the company, because there are other questions here too, which is, it's very obvious what the problems are, and we've just both talked about how easy these problems are to fix, right? And they are. These are not difficult problems to fix, right? So why do they keep making these mistakes? Well, if you call them mistakes, why do they keep making these decisions? Well, the answer is that they're in the thrall of banks, and the banks want them to do this stuff. And if the banks want them to do it, you do it, because that's where the actual money is, right?
So they're in with banks. They're also, they need to make sure that their market value doesn't crash. So if their market value crashes, their equity side of the balance sheet is going to go way down, and they're leveraged. So then they'll go from being in debt to being morbidly in debt. Like, and that can happen in a day or two, to even a big company, if they're enough in debt. So the idea that there could be financial interests telling them to keep doing this dumb checklist stuff, yeah, that's plausible. Especially if they're in a vulnerable situation where they can't just tell them to get lost. Am I sure that's what's happening? I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on behind, like, public statements. What I do know is it's starting to show. The damage is starting to show. People, and long-term investors are leaving. People aren't trying to get in. It's no longer just having Disney next to a release as an automatic bestseller when big opening days. So you can do this for a long time when you have great cred. You can't do it forever.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to put this, right? Like, one of the problems that's happening here as well is we know what everybody knows what the problem is, and make no mistake, Disney knows as well. But if they want to fix the company, what they need is somebody to clear house dramatically in a way that everybody is incentivized to want to avoid doing, because it will mean mass firings, right? The company needs to be gutted of at least half of its employees, and I would guess somewhere between 70 to 80%, right?
I don't even know if it's the numbers, it's more where they are. The problem they have is an administration. They have an administrative class that's basically grown in there that tells the artists how to do art, and tells the writers how to write, and tells the creative people what is actually going to be good and how to create. And they've got no skill at all. They can only look at a clipboard with a checklist on it.
So Disney's biggest money... Sorry, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, and these guys are part of what's strangling the company. And they're the ones that have to go. Unfortunately, they're the entrenched bureaucracy. They're always the hardest people to fire. They're usually the last people to go in a company. So that they're in for a fight to fix this place. Because the very people they need to get rid of are going to be some of the hardest people to get rid of. Because they know how to play the bureaucratic game.
So, for years and years and years, really since it's been created, the biggest moneymaker for Disney has paradoxically not been any of its movies, it's been the park, right? Walt Disney World and the various Disney parks print money for them. Now, cracks even are starting to show there. So the thing about the parks is that they are, in fact, very difficult to converge, right? SJW converge. The reason that they're difficult to converge is because that the way that the parks run is very immediate and boots on the ground, right? Like, the people who are immediately there are looking for the most efficient way to do things, right? That's not to say they can't be converged. That it just means it takes more of an effort to do so. And that's what's been happening. So, Disney parks have been converging, and now Disney World is even starting to make less and less and less money per year. Also, it's getting just worse and worse and worse. If you've watched, it went viral recently. Jenny Nicholson, who is a YouTuber, wrote a review of the Star Wars Hotel, and she revealed some really shocking things in it.
I heard it was bad.
I heard the hotel was bad, yes, but it's more than that. One of the things she revealed is that if you've ever been to Disney recently, which I have in a few years ago, right? Like, not that long ago.
It's been so long. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was there a few years ago, like 3 years ago, I think. No, less than that. Whatever. It's fine. It might have been a year ago. Wow. Anyway, went to Disney World, right, with my siblings, and had a good time, right? But it's interesting because if you go there, one of their big things, they add a Star Wars world to Hollywood Studios, one of the 4 parks. Okay, so Star Wars world. Well, I was in favor of this because Star Wars had been infecting the rest of Hollywood Studios, so I saw this as a way of quarantining it. Because I'm like, I want Hollywood Studios back. And it did kind of work for that, but, yeah, it's whatever. The thing is, if you go to Star Wars World, it's kind of okay, right? Like, it's for a park that they've been really, really advertising and pushing. You were definitely expecting more than what we got. So, what happened? Why? Well, Jenny reveals in her video, through some pretty good detective work, that a lot of the things that were supposed to be free parts of Star Wars World, like roaming droids and
microtransactions,
yeah, you're getting the idea. Things not exact, but worse than you're thinking, though, actually. But you have the right idea. Things like roaming droids, right? Droids that roamed around the park. Things like, but the thing is, that's expensive because they need maintenance, right?
Right.
Things like free games you could play in the park. Like Disney used to do this. They would have scavenger hunts that were actually like really well made. You know, they would like add displays and shops and things that moved around if you interacted with it. This was supposed to be a thing in Star Wars World, and it's gone. It's removed, right? And they keep gutting it. Characters in the streets, like they cut that down drastically.
It's interesting.
All sorts of things. So we go, but why? Why did they do this? And they go, well, she has a theory. She says, having been to the extremely expensive Star Wars hotel, right? She thinks a lot of the free things that they were going to include in the park for all visitors were then packaged with the Star Wars hotel experience instead.
Right. There's something fascinating going on with this, which is there was a time, we'll never know, because we're the wrong generation. We were born after this time, where the Disney World experience wasn't something that you'd save up years for or you're extremely rich. Those days are gone. So it's always been, as far as we've been around, something for middle class, saves up for years for it and does it once. And if you're wealthy, you can go more than once in your lifetime. It's always been for us that expensive thing where the hotel and staying over and the effect of it is a big chunk up front, but then you can actually relax and have fun while you're there and worry about the bank account hit later.
Yep.
It sounds now that they're having a hit on both sides of their project. So first they just raised the price dramatically. So we missed that. Now they're raising the price again. They're putting the price on tons of other stuff, and they're cutting services.
Yep.
This is all indicative of something that's basically financially falling apart.
And this is going to be, you're exactly right. And one of the signs of this is that Universal Studios, which was always the little brother to Disney, they're getting a massive expansion, right? Like, massive.
It would be the time to expand. If Disney World's going down, you want to go in and go up.
That's what I was going to say. They smell blood in the water, is what that means, right? So they're adding... First off, I've been to Universal once as well. This was like 6-7 years ago or something. Universal's Harry Potter world is quite amazing. If you care about Harry Potter, it is probably nicer than any of the current Disney parks. And, like... I don't even say that lightly, because I still enjoy Disney, right? But Harry Potter World is an experience that if you grew up with the series especially, which I did,
right.
You really need, like, it's
throwing
really
at
worth
the
your
fall
time.
of Disney, dude. This is the fall of the House of Usher. Like, this is a terrible thing.
It is, like, it is and it
going
isn't.
down.
On one hand...
Unless some miracle happens.
Oh, yeah, it is and it isn't. Like, on one hand, couldn't happen to nicer people. On the other hand, I suppose if you want me to go like, well, what do I wish would happen? Well, if you really must know what I wish would happen, besides like if, mass conversion is obviously number one, but that doesn't seem very plausible. In the slightly more plausible, but still won't happen range, it getting bought out by somebody who actually gives a shit would be the second best thing. Right?
And plausible. A plausible thing that could happen. Yeah, it gets trashed enough that it actually falls into the affordable and somebody buys it and it's like, okay, time to fix it. Yes, that could happen.
I mean, and even then, I don't think it will, but like, sure.
Doubt it.
That would probably be the best case scenario in the realm of like things that I kind of wish would happen, but outside of that, like, when Disney falls, I will shed no tears at the time, because it's up to us to take on the culture that the original Walt Disney, who was a great man, worth doing on a great man stream one day, if we ever do that.
This is not the same. This is not the same Disney as before.
He would...
Okay,
I'm not one of the people who does this a lot, but I could tell you from what I have read of him, he really would hate what Disney became. Like, he would... I honestly think, like, he would have opposed it with every fiber of his being. Especially what they're doing to the parks. That would have hurt him the most. Like,
he's mass fired for much, much less than what they're doing now. He would tear it apart.
If he knew what they were doing to the parks, it would have broken his heart. Like, he genuinely... I don't know what he would have done. It would have been bad. But, yeah, like, this is not Walt Disney's Disney World. When it dies, you could be sad for a moment, but just remember that's died. Disney died a long time ago, right?
It's like a tree where the heart of it's died and rotted away, but the tree still looks vital. Except now we're getting to the part where the leaves are dying and falling off. Spare branches look like they're grasping at the sky, even in the middle of summer when it should be vibrant and full of life. And one day a big storm's going to blow through and the whole thing will come down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's... So I guess what I would say is, like, I don't think that Disney's going to go bankrupt in the year. And going bankrupt isn't the end anyway, right? People tend to think of it that way, but that's not really true. That's an oversimplification. I will say, I think that potentially within 20 years, we might see one of the 4 Disney World parks close down, probably Animal Kingdom.
Mhm.
Now,
Or probably one of the foreign ones. That's something to keep an eye on too.
that's true, but Animal Kingdom is the one Disney World park that like makes the least money, and has a lot of upkeep costs because it's a big zoo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if within 20 years they shut down Animal Kingdom, and I will be disappointed when that happens. Honestly, like
Hmm.
the thing about Disney World nowadays versus these other parks is that what you were saying about Disney World being more expensive and being a thing like if you were middle class, you saved up for years and went once and maybe once every 5 years, right?
Hmm.
Like, and if
Yeah.
you're rich, you could go more often, and if you're poor, you maybe you go once ever, right?
Hmm.
The thing about that though is that for this model to work the way that Disney wants it to work, they need. I'm trying to think of how to put this. What they need is Disney to be better than everything, right?
Yes.
And they used to know that, right? Like once upon a time, they were very aware of this and they were very focused on the fact that when you came to Disney World, what you were paying for is the best vacation, right? It was the happiest place on earth. Now
Hmm.
you go there and every decision they make seems to be focused on how to maximize every inch of profit. Now, I
Hmm.
am not saying that Disney was not always trying to maximize profit. Of course they
Hmm.
were. However, it was a different type of experience then, right? Like the whole point of it was that they knew they could charge you this much because included in that cost, right, was the
Hmm.
fact that you were going to freaking Disney World.
You were going to have a good time. You were going
Yeah.
to do wonderful things. Everything would be top quality. Everything would be friendly. Every square foot of the place was carefully calculated on how do we just have people have a good time and take a load off and have fun,
Yeah.
so
Now
that
I'm
you
not
would spend a
saying
huge
that.
amount of money and be glad you did.
Uh-huh. I'm not saying that modern Disney World isn't fun anymore. I had a very fun time, right? Like I
Hmm.
don't regret the trip at all. I honestly had a blast. What I am saying though is that the focus of the park has changed because things. This is what I was getting at with the Star Wars cruiser thing, right? Things that you used to be able to expect Disney to offer you because you were paying
Hmm.
Disney prices are now
Hmm.
being charged, and they are
Right.
upcharging everything. Disney always was expensive, it was never cheap, but the prices have gotten to the level of like literally absurd, right?
Hmm.
And they've started to like getting rid of fast pass is a great example of what we're talking about. When we first went to Disney World, they had fast pass. Fast pass is an awesome system, right?
Hmm.
Uh, you sign up for it at various parts. You get to the ride at the time you signed up for. You could walk right on. It makes the entire experience of being in the park way more pleasant. You don't need to wait on lines at other parts because you could do whatever you want in the meantime. You could walk around, right? Enjoy
Hmm.
yourself and then go to the ride. And you can plan out your entire day this way, so you have a schedule. You know, great system.
Hmm.
Well, Disney realized, hey, wait a minute, you don't need to pay for that. And people really like getting on rides fast. Let's charge for
Hmm.
it. So that's what they did.
Right.
So they replaced it with an app called the Genie app. It costs money. And then if you get a new ride that's really desirable, you got to pay extra money on top of the money you're paying for
Of
the
course.
Genie app to get on. And the Genie app itself, this came out at the time, and it was actually really fascinating to follow in real time. So the app purports to tell you when there are lulls in lines and things. Well, somebody did an analysis of the app. Like they went on and they looked
Hmm.
into the code and then they looked at the actual park and they
Uh huh.
realized that the things that the app was telling you was actually a scam. It was lying to you. It wasn't looking at lower wait times at all. What it was actually doing was looking at what rides what rides didn't have could use more people, right? Like based on their own internal metrics,
Hmm.
right? Like, hey, we could really use more people in this part of the park at this time because it's a lot on the employees if there are a bunch of people over here, right? So the Genie app sends out the thing, oh, this ride's wait times are low. They're not actually low or high, right?
Here's the absolutely kind of annoying thing about the whole thing. They very easily could have said, just kept the software exactly the same and just said, this is what's burning me up. And just said, hey, these are areas of the park that aren't as busy as the other ones are. And they could be completely honest with it.
Like,
But
yes and no. I might be
somehow occur to them to even do that.
I mean, maybe I might be explaining this poorly. Like, all I know is that the way that they did it, they were lying to the people, right? Like, it was quite bad. And with that said, though, like, if you're going to pay the money to go to Disney, right now, you're probably going... And this is why you'll see, like, news articles and things calling Disney dystopian nowadays. Was that my experience? No, it was not my experience. Because overall, like, the thing is that the baseline height of Disney from before was so high that even now, going to Disney is still quite amazing.
I think there's some place called Dismal Land or something like that that's actually a deliberate parody of Disneyland.
Yeah. I will say this, though. The one thing that I noticed, in terms of, like, did I notice less people there? No, but... So, here's what I mean by that. When we went originally in 2018 as a full family, I then went, like, 5 years later with my siblings, right? When we went as a full family, it was in November. This is the relative off-season of Disney. It's all relative because it's Disney, so there is no real off-season. But this is when there are less people overall in the park, right? It's still quite crowded, but it's manageable. Yeah. Well, the next time we went 5 years later was in July. Did we notice less people there? No, but we did not notice more. Like, it felt to me like it was as crowded in July as it had been 5 years earlier in November. Make of that what you will. Like,
I make that
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all of this is to say is that when Disney dies, I mean, I guess I won't say, like, I would shed no tears. I mean, not literally. Like, I'm not going to cry anyway. But, yeah, no. in the metaphorical sense, like, I guess I wouldn't say I'll shed no tears. It's a sad thing. But at the same time, there's some celebrating to be done as well, because that would mean that this, the cancerous people who hijacked Disney's legacy have finally run out of things to destroy, right? And in that sense, it's a good thing. It's weird too. Like, one of the problems there is a good thing that's going to be coming soon in the movie making industry, and I know that people don't think it's a good thing, but it is, and that is AI. AI movie making is going to kick open the door to movie making in a way that it was
like
not.
Amateur movie making. Because, like, you could produce, like, effects and scene editing and things like that more efficiently.
I mean, even, like, producing full movies. But, yeah, like, it's going to kick open the door. So, here's the problem with movie making. When you look at books have a thriving indie scene, right? Why do they have a thriving indie scene? Well, because you can make a book for virtually free, right? Negligible amounts of money.
Yeah, you got to put in the effort and time, but
not the money. Like, you have the resources. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to be rich to do it or know people.
In fact, the actual big problem with the indie scene in books is that it's oversaturated, right? It's hard to find quality. It's hard to find quality.
It's hard to stand out and find quality in there, depending on which side you're on.
Video games is another one. Like, video games is somewhere in between movies and books. It takes effort to create a video game. It takes skill to create a video game, but it is doable on a relatively reasonable budget. With a reasonable team of people. Therefore, despite the fact that AAA gaming is a disaster, indie gaming is absolutely thriving right now. I would go so far as to say that video games are in a weirdly good place at the moment. And this is because, despite the fact that the AAA industry in video games is a complete dumpster fire, the indie scene...
like they're all trying to copy each other.
Yeah. the indie scene is doing fantastically well. There are some brilliant indie games coming out every month, it seems, right?
Hmm.
So,
Right.
video games are doing great because they have an indie scene. Movies, it is very hard to have an indie scene. They do have indie movies, like they
Oh,
exist,
sure.
but
They, you're still starting at like $1 million for like decent quality camera and film work.
yeah, even like
So
the absolute minimum budget movies that I've seen are like $100,000 for like found footage type films. And
yeah,
like, think about that for a moment. That means I am effectively out. I cannot
yeah,
make a
I'm
full length
priced out of
movie.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is where AI is going to come in and completely change the game. Right? Like, you are going to start to see this, and I really hope we do soon. I think we will. You're going to start to see more and more people making movies and posting them that are full length and decent quality because they're using AI to do it. And
That makes sense.
I think that this is going to be a really, really good thing for the industry. I'm not cynical about AI like some people are. It's weird because I'm more cynical than some people and less than others, right? Like, on one hand, I don't agree with the people who go like, I've seen professors and people go on the air and be like, I'm not worried about AI. I could tell what AI is. And I'm like, you absolutely can't. You think you can, and you're wrong. Like, I don't think people realize how easy it is to write an essay with AI that, like, saves you like, I want you to, this is the problem. When people think of writing an essay with AI, what they think of is crap that middle school students would do, right?
Right.
Which is like, they go on ChatGPT, they copy and paste it, and it's really obviously ChatGPT because it's nothing like the middle schoolers. But that is like scratching the surface of what you could actually do with this stuff. So let's say, this is what I mean and why I say college professors, you can and should be worried, right? Because here's an example of something you could do. Let's say you had to write an essay, a college essay, 10 pages, right? 15 sources, APA citations, I don't know, right? And it is on the topic of, how cells get energy, right? I just made up a topic. I don't even
Go
know.
for it.
Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Is the only thing I remember. Okay, now, you are a student. You could spend 5 hours, maybe 10, perhaps, if you want to do good editing, writing this very important 10-page, 15-source essay. Let's say 5 hours, just to be nice. Somewhere between 3 and 5. You're a fast writer. Okay. Or you can copy and paste all of the requirements into ChatGPT. You could say, I will need it to be at least, 10,000 words, right? This is a 10,000 word essay. I need 15 APA cited sources.
Right.
Add your in-text citations. You hit go. Now, if you just copied and pasted that and then put it on a document and sent it in, obviously you would fail. Instead, what you would do is you would take that, you would read it, and then you would go, hey, ChatGPT, and then you would type in, hey, ChatGPT, add a little more detail at paragraph 7, and, right, and maybe add in a little bit more about mitochondria on this over here.
Or they touch it up themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
You do that, and then you go, great.
Do what usually keeps people keep getting caught with, which is they don't check punctuation or anything else. Like, actually read the document.
Oh, yeah, you do. But what I'm saying, though, is that you're still saving. So let's say you do this. ChatGPT makes your corrections, pumps it out again. Great. It has in-text citations. You go, okay, great, thank you. Or it gives you citations. You go, great, can you please add in-text citations in APA format? ChatGPT does it, right? Go, great. Give me the list of citations, please, at the end. Put it in alphabetical order.
And whilst there's nothing wrong with using, I think, software for formatting and to help with editing, using it to create this is obviously
it's the creation,
a problem.
that's the issue. All right, so now you have your full essay. This whole process has probably taken you about 15 minutes, let's say. You copy and paste. This is only the beginning, like of ChatGPT creating it. Okay. You copy and paste the essay into a document and you format it correctly. This takes you probably about another 15 minutes, right? You're at 30 minutes. You formatted it. You add a cover page. You add a reference page. That's 10 minutes. You run it through Grammarly to check for punctuation. And then, just to be safe, you use a plagiarism checker. And then you change any lines that the plagiarism checker says are a problem. We'll add another half hour for all of that, right? So, let's say we got about 15 minutes to create the essay and change it up to your specifications. Another half hour to format it properly, add a title page, right? And another half hour to make sure the grammar is corrected. So let's say 1 hour 45, about, a little less than 2 hours. But, and most importantly, this is all done with you using way less mental energy to compose this, right?
And
you could be doing things in the background as you're doing
frankly, don't even need to understand what they're reading.
Yep, you don't.
Which is the big problem.
Certainly, and by the way, certainly you should know enough to be able to double check and make sure it's not saying anything blatantly false. Right?
But, we're not talking... We're going from scholar to the equivalent of somebody skimming the textbook.
All of this is to say, then, essay that would probably take you, if you're really fast, 3 hours to write. You can get done in 2, but with extremely little mental energy spent on it. And with you doing other stuff in the background. Right? So, this is where I would say, like, when people say, oh, I'm not worried about AI, it's like, no, you should be, if you want, at least in that sense. Now, the next question then is, how much of this is a bad thing? And then you go, well, it's sort of like using a calculator in math. We need to figure out how to work with it.
So right now we have a bunch of people in the business world who buy into the hype with AI and are fascinated with the idea on how much money they're going to save, without understanding the limitations of what is at this point a very experimental program. So they're doing the equivalent of firing experts and replacing it with ChatGPT, which is absolutely stupid and going to bite them in the butt. But everyone's doing it because it's the hot thing that everyone's doing. My guess is what's going to happen, that's going to blow up huge over the next few years. People talk about how AI isn't really real, it doesn't do anything, it's no good. It will become vastly less popular. And during that kind of dark ages where people are discounting what it can do, you'll see the next generation of AI get written that's going to be incredibly strong. And people will just be kind of surprised at how effective it is when it shows up then. Because we will have jumped and gone all in when it wasn't ready and ignored it when it was developed into something that was actually a very powerful tool. It's already a strong tool, but like I'm not talking about like artificial sentience or sci-fi AI. I'm just talking about like proper goal and pattern seeking programs. I think it's going to get immensely stronger, like categorically better than anything we have today. But I think it's going to do it in the background after the hype is blown up.
Yeah,
It's
I think
so overhyped.
This idea that anything is going to happen in terms of like, I'm trying to think of how to put it. Like, there is no danger of like, oh, AI are going to become alive and decide that they need to kill all humans, right?
No.
Like that, there's literally no danger of that. All we have to do is tell them no. They are like one thing that I've always said is that what are computers? Computers are rock banging machines. No rocks means one thing. Bang two rocks, it means do another thing. Right? Bang one rock, it means one thing. Bang no rocks, it means another thing. Bang no rock and one rock, and then you got binary code, right?
These are going to be tools that will accomplish goals. And evil people will use computers and AI to work great evil, because it'll leverage whatever they do. And you can also have creative and good people that can use it to leverage great works of creation and good. Like, it's going to make what people do very, very efficient.
Yes, exactly. And that's where, like, with Hollywood, I think that this is going to open up filmmaking to people who have budgets of, like, similar to what you have for video games, right? So 1,000, 5,000, right? People who, like, come together with their friends and start a studio and can actually make real things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to
Yes.
start seeing more movies made in that way. And I think that's a good thing, because that's I think that's the main reason that Hollywood has been able to get away with, like, just completely ruining movies, right? Like, with almost no alternatives, because we can't afford to create alternatives, right? Video games, we haven't had to settle for that. You've been able to get indie games and still play whatever you want every year, right? And there's all different genres and all different concepts and some wild stuff, and some of it's bad, but a lot of it's not. Hollywood, we've never had that, but we badly, badly need it, because you've been going over, like, in the past 10 years of Hollywood, it is slim pickings. It's really bad. Probably the last truly great movie, as you mentioned, I mentioned The Social Network, maybe Interstellar, right?
We might see something like the dawn of the age of film. So film was, in spite of the equipment being expensive, was kind of like the poor man's alternative to theater or a vaudeville show or something like that. It was possible for the early film people to do relatively inexpensively.
Yeah,
All of a
incidentally, the pricing out of the average person from theater is another crime against humanity. But,
yes. Yeah, and that's going to collapse. They're going to kill movie theaters as we know it. And whilst people will assume that means everything will go into paid services streaming, I wouldn't count on them maintaining their lockdown monopoly on information forever either. So how that pipeline's going to work, I don't know. But yeah, I think we're going to go more and more digital. And I'm going to miss theaters, but I don't think it's something they can keep going, because something that used to be just like a cheap evening out, like I'm going to spend some money and get some popcorn and have a good afternoon, was like gone. So it's a mix of tickets and the general other things that are going on, but
yeah, when it comes to, like, what happened on Broadway and whatever, that history is different than what happened with the movie industry, though there are, of course, similarities.
Well,
like, if you know anything about the industry, you know that the first I think, like, I'm trying to remember what it was, like, maybe the first $100 ticket or something was the producers. So, and there are people who will say the producers saved Broadway because, like, it was bringing money to Broadway that hadn't been there in years. And there is a sense in which that is true. But in another sense, Broadway has also priced out everyone. The absolute cheapest tickets you could get. And I will tell you, like, I did this once. I got it. The way you get tickets this cheap is it needs to be a new show that is unknown, certainly not one of the Disney shows. So, like, forget doing it with, like, a new production of Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast or something.
Oh,
right?
Man, that was something. Just a quick thing. Did see a stage production of Aladdin, and it was
good or bad.
They put their heart into it, right?
They tried.
Okay.
Fair. Okay. My mom's seen Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. Like, this was as a gift, and she thought it was fantastic. I'm sure it was, right? Like, it's supposed to be very
Mhm.
good. So is Lion King, which I would love to see, except tickets are incredibly expensive.
Yes.
Anyway, going back to what I would say, like, if you want tickets as cheap as what I'm about to say, what you need to do
Mhm.
is you need to find a show that is unknown, so no hype, right? Like, no
Mhm.
serious hype. Certainly
Of
not one of
course.
the Disney shows, right?
Mhm.
And you need to go on preview opening night, right? So before the
Mhm.
finished product is actually out, but while the show is in previews and as early into its run as you can, and get the cheap seats. Then
Right.
maybe you can get tickets that are, I think it was around $59,
Yeah,
right?
here's what fascinates me is there's this phenomenon. Now that I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about how for a while movies were the cheap alternative to theater, and theater, of course, formulated theater as we have it in the more modern from the Middle Ages on west, not Greek theater. Theater was the alternative to opera, right? Each of these
Yep.
was to be kind of the more affordable, more accessible, easier to produce, scalable mass entertainment. And yet each is kind of steadily moving its way into a tiny number of people being able to afford it, which of course is always going to be the death of the thing because a tiny handful of rich patrons isn't going to be able to provide the funds that a mass market thing can. And then people raise prices to make up for that, and the whole thing goes down the drain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess what I would say to that is people like, so there. How about this? Let me put it like this: there is an essay by Tom Simon that is highly worth reading. It's in his Smiggy McStudge
Most of
series.
us are.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
his if you don't know his Smiggy McStudge series, they're like screw tape style essays, but on broader cultural ideas. Right?
Hmm?
Incredible, excellent essays. One of my all-time favorite essays is his essay "Death by Bebop," which I highly recommend. But this is a companion essay that he wrote to that, similar in some ways, called "Zombie Opera." And zombie opera is about how opera was killed completely dead, right? How did the McStudge kill opera? Well, it is exactly the process that you're talking about. He turned it into something that only rich, snooty people did, and boxed out everyone else who would want to see it. Which is not how opera started, right? And
Right.
that's exactly what they did, as you said. It's what they're in the process of doing to theater.
And to Disney World.
Yeah, like the in when it comes to opera, I'm gonna actually look up the essay because, like, first off, you really need to read the Smiggy McStudge essays. I will say this: I've read several people trying to riff on Lewis's Screw Tape,
Mhm.
and the only one who I think got his own voice is Tom Simon.
Tom's an actual genius. I
He is.
think that his stuff is not more widely seen and known is kind of a sign our ability to communicate art in this era is messed up.
I'll link it to you. Read this and
Mhm.
read Zombie Opera.
Okay.
Or, I'm
Thank you.
sorry, and Death by Bebop is what I meant to say. This is Zombie Opera.
Oh, with your focus on there you go. Okay.
Yeah, he
I will
says,
check that out.
there are so many fantastic quotes in here. It's so good. I knew me, as he says at the beginning, I'm trying to find it. If you mention high culture to anybody in the English speaking world and ask them what is the first thing that comes to mind, there is an excellent chance that they will reply opera. For generations past, the opera has been the playground of the wealthy elite and the social climbing sub elite. I do not, of course, mean that these classes of people write or perform operas. That would be absurd. Though the snobbery and self-importance of the people who do perform operas for their benefit, I am happy to say, is equally absurd and quite real. No, I mean that rich people and senior bureaucrats gather at palatial opera houses not to see the opera, but to be seen as
Right.
opera goers. They dress up in possible imitations of the clothing worn by 19th century aristocrats. They then spend hours of agonizing tedium brought on by music that they do not like, by acting that nobody could praise, and by singing in an artificial and complicated style, all done in a language that they do not understand and for which no translation as a matter of etiquette is supplied. Only a Philistine, we teach them, would ask what an opera means. But during the intervals, they have the ecstasy of chattering with their fellow elite in the lobby, eating awful finger sandwiches, swilling champagne, and generally carrying on as if they were the favored guests of Le Grand Monarque for an unusually exclusive evening at Versailles. Like the Pharisee who prayed on the street corners to be seen praying by men, they have their reward. Yeah,
Oh,
fantastic. And he does say later, for its origins, opera was a fairly low form of popular entertainment, a pastime for the sort of Italians who were neither rich enough nor snobby enough to go in for the formal theater. And he mentions opera was the top 40 radio of its times. The songs of the gondoliers were the latest popular hits.
right. Now,
Also,
this is
the comments underneath are quite good.
okay. Look forward to reading the rest of it. I think my time is coming up. I'm going to jettison here, I think.
I was about to say, I do want to read one more thing, though, because this is in the comment, and it's written by Tom in response to someone who asked him about the works of Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert and Sullivan are vile, unspeakably vile, incorrigibly vile. They fulfill all the essential functions of opera, but do it in an English idiom accessible to the people, whom we particularly wanted to be left in the dark. What is worse, they laugh at their betters. They are witty and satirical at the expense of the solemn goofs, entitled incompetents that were and are set over the suffering race of Englishmen. It is hard enough at the best of times to get anyone to take an English aristocrat seriously, but Gilbert and Sullivan have made it flatly impossible. The only saving grace is that they are dead and enshrined, and the arts councils have made them into a shibboleth. With every year that goes by, their works inch closer to the zombie condition to which we have so incessantly labored to reduce all the arts. Meanwhile, a pox on them and on all who actually understand them and enjoy them. And, he then says, somebody asks him about P.G. Wodehouse, and Simon says, oh, don't get the McStudge started on Wodehouse. He begins with Thief, Wodehouse, we hates it forever, and goes downhill from there. And with that, yeah, I will once again say to everybody who does end up actually listening to this at any point, please read Tom Simon's, it's his bondwine.com. His Smiggy McStudge essays. Once again, Zombie Opera and Death by Bebop.
My favorite of his printed works is I have a copy of his Lord Talon, which is
Lord Talon's Revenge is excellent.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So
my personal favorite thing by Tom Simon is probably Writing Down the Dragon.
And for technical work, yeah, like on how to write and how to, well, frankly, deal with a lot of the other issues in art and creation these days. Yes, a worthy piece. Take care, all, and good night, or whichever time we are transported to when you finally hear this.